Yeah, welcome to this very exciting dialogue and conversation. Somehow people use the word fireside chat, but I don't see any fireside here. So I prefer to be old-fashioned and use the word dialogue and conversation. The topic is sustainability leadership, navigating the challenges and opportunities. So first of all, I'd like to thank Eric Lim, Chief Sustainability Officer of UOB. Eric is somebody who's really inspiring and always very positive in his mindset and very optimistic person. So it's indeed, we are very grateful for you to take the time to spend with us on this conversation. And he's very good at lots of different topics. Technology, sustainable finance, sustainability reporting and so on. I'll very briefly introduce him in a moment. But before I do that, it's probably good to, I know all of you are here because you have an interest in sustainability. That goes without saying. So, but let me still set the stage a little bit. I mean, a very quick, brief introduction. Clearly, sustainability is a hot topic. I would say, along with sustainability now, probably AI and this company NVIDIA is also extremely hot. And I wish I had invested in NVIDIA a couple of years ago. And I can assure you, even if I had invested in NVIDIA 2 years ago, and clearly in that case I could probably retire and spend the rest of my life on a beach, I would still probably have done this conversation with Eric, because sustainability is indeed an existential challenge for all of us, right? We all know about the need to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 by 2100, so that the sea level doesn't rise. And of course, beyond I always joke in the class that before we all die from drowning, we can all die of hunger, because the food challenges are too much, because there's just not enough land. So we need to be much more productive in terms of how we produce our food. So all these things are connected: energy, food, water, they're all connected. And the immediate present challenge that we face, almost all the countries, top countries in the world, including India and China, and you wonder, China does things on its own, still they're promised to be net zero by 2070, 2060, India by 2070. Singapore never makes promises, right, that it can't keep. 2 years ago, Lawrence Wong in the SEW conference, Singapore International Energy Week, we have also promised to be net zero by 2050. All the top companies in the world, and we have UOB here. I mean, UOB scope 1 emissions, which is the emissions, I mean, for all banks, scope 1 is 0, because they don't emit anything from their operations itself. Most of it is just, yeah, a little bit. I mean, unless your CEO owns a car that is owned by the company, and the car is not electric, probably, right? So, and scope 2 is their largest emissions. But what the NGOs and the stakeholders are challenging them is to reduce their what's called their scope 3 emissions, financed emissions, right? So sustainability is front and center for banks and other organizations. Yet at the same time, if you want to get to net zero, it's not just about financing, it's about new technologies. And just before the conversation, Paul, my colleague, was asking him a question, and Eric sees the glass as 3/4 full, right? I mean, there's a lot of technologies that can happen in the next 30 years. We also need business models, we need policies, and most importantly, we need leadership and people to actually address these challenges. Of course, in 1 hour, we are not going to be able to address all this. So we are going to essentially focus on strategies for navigating the challenges, maybe with a focus on the finance angle, because Eric is from UOB. And maybe I'll spend about 20-25 minutes on that, and then sort of move towards career planning for sustainability leadership positions. So that's the broad plan for the conversation today. And I know many of you, when you registered, you actually submitted some questions, and I've incorporated those questions in my discussion plan, but I'll at some point open it up for you to ask some questions as well within the limited time that we have. Now probably I should introduce Eric a little bit more formally, but I'll allow Eric to share about his own leadership journey in sustainability in the second half of the conversation. Eric is UOB Group's Chief Sustainability Officer and Managing Director and Group Head of Finance for UOB. He has been CSO, is in fact the first and only CSO that UOB has had since April 2021, and heads a dedicated corporate sustainability office within UOB Group. And prior to UOB, he was MD and head of wholesale banking at Stanchart, and before that at GE Capital. So he clearly pivoted from finance into sustainability, probably has one leg still in finance in a sense. He has the EMBA degree from Northwestern University's Kellogg School, but most importantly, Eric is our own accountancy graduate from NTU. In fact, what our memories make us remember is that Eric was actually a bright-eyed undergraduate student in the first semester of 1995 in my undergraduate class, right? So that's what I can recall, and probably I don't know whether you remember much of me from those days. It is probably one of the toughest killer courses in the program at that point in time, but hopefully I made it slightly different in a sense. And Eric also sits on our alumni advisory board. So I'm going to sort of kick off the conversation by asking you, I believe you were at COP28 in Dubai in December. So what was your takeaways from the COP28 summit? So maybe we can start from there.
Sure. Hi everyone. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you so much for coming out for an evening of conversation. I hope to be able to add some perspectives, but the first thing I'm going to say is I'm sure there are a lot of folks who are already experts on different parts of sustainability in your own different fields through your own personal learnings and journeys already. So I do not profess to be the know-it-all expert here. I am a CSO in the financial services industry, and it would be great to participate in a conversation with everyone. Okay, so with Prof's introduction on COP28, I will give you my major couple of takeaways. Right, the first one is it is amazing to me that we were able to make as much progress as we did at COP28. Now, a lot of folks look at COP28 and say it wasn't very impactful. It was in the Middle East, in the middle of oil-producing countries. There was a lot of representation by the oil and gas industry, by the fossil fuels industry, etc., etc., etc. But I think what was very important for me to see in COP28 was that there was actually that ferocious debate, that arm wrangling, that almost fisty fights, that then resulted in the language we had around fossil fuels, which is the transitioning away from fossil fuels, the talking about increasing renewable energy, etc., etc., etc. Now, the reason I think that's important is if there was no fight at COP, what it essentially tells us is that COP is not a platform that really has teeth or has relevance. But the very fact that you had the multi-stakeholders on the side of more ambitious decarbonization versus figuring out how to defend the fossil fuels industry and everyone in between, bring their voices for that fisty fight at COP28 means that COP will continue to be a platform where nearly 200 countries will come together, debate, negotiate on how globally we'll move towards decarbonization. That is the one biggest thing that was a takeaway for me. Now, does that mean we've got it solved? Of course not. We all know the state of the world, right? And decarbonization is an amazingly complex issue because it is not only about decarbonization. It is about political spectrums, it's about social economic issues, it's about country versus country from a competitive perspective. It is an amazingly complex issue, right? So every COP, we're going to make some progress, hopefully, and we'll see where we get with that. A second thing that was quite interesting for me to see at COP is starting to move away from this commitments conversation, right? Of course, that's still a very important part of the process, but for example, Breakthrough Energy, they had a platform where they were talking about some of these new technologies. And this was something that Prof and I were talking about before the session started. What is our level of optimism, or my level of optimism, on 2030 commitments as well as 2050 net zero. Frankly, I will be honest with you, I think 2030 is going to be quite tough in terms of a lot of the reductions that everybody's committed to. And the major reason I think 2030 is going to be tough is there's a lot of government to government within a national ecosystem, coordination between regulations, real economy, financial services economy, a lot of the tooling in terms of blended finance or new energy technologies that really need to come up that we're not very good at coordinating as a global ecosystem yet. Okay, so to reach those ambitious goals of 2030, I think, honestly, personally, we're going to be a bit lacking, right? Now, 2050, I'm a lot more optimistic around, and that's because I think there are a lot of new technologies that will start to come onto the market in the next, 2, 5, 10, 15 years, take your pick, where these technologies will become commercially viable, they will become mature, and they will begin to be able to replace existing technologies because it makes sense to. And you don't have to do this hard wrangling of guilting economies into decarbonization or carbon taxing them into irrelevance or threatening them with carbon border adjustment mechanisms or tariffs, etc., right? So I think there is a way that economies and technologies and industries will start to transform. So there was a couple of my key takeaways from COP28.
Okay. Yeah, so to me, as an academic, we are inherently paid to be cynics, right? So, you can see the negative part of COP28 as well. Sometimes I share that, there was a lot of sideshow going on, which is probably not exactly positive in a sense, but I sort of share Eric's optimism. Analogy to put is we all are overworked in a sense, and we have deadlines. We have a deadline next month, and then when we get closer to it, we get some release because we know that, actually the deadline is a little bit later. So to 2030, it's unrealistic that we can get there, but the fact that over the last 28 COPs, even though the needle has moved very slowly, it is still moving, and therefore 2050 is a realistic target to get there. That's sort of the message Eric is sort of sharing. Now I'm probably going to go into some technical questions based on what the participants asked, and then maybe open up the conversation. So as far as UOB itself is concerned, a huge percentage of the emissions are from scope 3 category 15 in a sense. And I was very impressed with the report that you published. It's an open report actually, the UOB's journey to net zero. It says 2022, but it was published in October 2023. Inside the report it says that, and they have clear pathways. So maybe you can just summarize, where is UOB in your net zero journey?
So for a bit of context setting first, for those of you who are not from financial services, one of the things that's quite interesting about financial services is it's not our operational footprint that really matters, right? If you think about my operational scope 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to assume I can use scope language generally with everyone. It's tiny, right? To Prof's point, my scope 1 is what? A couple of diesel backup generators for when the grid cuts out and I need to fire it up, which is almost never, right? A couple of company cars that aren't EVs, how many of those do we have? Very little, right? Operationally, most of our footprint is actually scope 2, which is the energy we use, right? And from an operational carbon neutrality perspective, the way we go about it, even though it's small, we still address it because it's about right to speak, right? How can we go speak to our clients about decarbonization and net zero when the first thing they can ask me is, well, UOB, how have you addressed your operational footprint? And we go, we haven't, right? So that's not credible. So we use a combination of energy efficiency initiatives to bring down our energy use. We use RECs, which are renewable energy certificates, for our scope 2. And we very judiciously use carbon offsets for our residual scope 1 and 3, right? So that's operational carbon neutrality. Now, for those of you who are, again, not familiar with financial services, Scope 3 finance emissions, which is the emissions I have to count because I have lent money to companies and they have their own Scope 1 and 2 emissions, is estimated is to be about 700 times that of your operational footprint, right? So for every bank out in the world, if they tell you they've achieved carbon neutrality, yay, right, for operations, but they haven't yet come up with a high quality view on how to decarbonize their financing portfolio, don't pass muster, right? That is actually the bulk of our emissions. So when we embarked on the journey of figuring out what to do from our net zero strategy perspective, what we wanted to do was look at a couple of the key sectors that we finance, aka it's material to our financing portfolio. And number two, where these sectors had high carbon emissions profiles that really needed to be decarbonized for the global economy, regional economy, and national economies to be net zero, right? So we identified two large ecosystems that needed to be addressed, at least for our portfolio. The first one is around the energy ecosystem. So power generation, right? All of our electricity around us. Oil and gas, right, as an industry, as well as automotive being a downstream use. For the built environment ecosystem, it was real estate, all these beautiful buildings that we have. It was construction. We were the first bank in the world, actually, to come up with a construction net zero target, right? Because it makes no sense if you're going to address real estate and not address construction. It's one single value chain. And then finally, steel, right? Which, of course, is high carbon. And the way we went about it was a little unusual and different from the rest of the industry. So again, to get into technical geekness, a lot of the global banks, including a couple of our peer banks in the market, they would have used what we call global decarbonization pathways. And what that means is what the global pathway for decarbonization by 2030 or 2050 looks like, and they would have set the net zero targets according to that. We actually took a contrarian view and said every economy has a different starting point, has a different energy mix, and has a different makeup of the economies, right? And it was very important that when we were setting our net zero targets, that we were able to take into account the regional nuances of the economies that we were actually financing, right? And so we actually use what are called regional pathways. I'm going to be really vulnerable to you guys and admit to you that when we went to market in 2022, we were the first major bank in the entire world that was using regional pathways. And I remember saying to board and to CEO, if this goes poorly, it was my privilege to have worked in UOB, right? I will, take this on the chin, right? And what was really interesting was when we went to the market and we explained why we use regional pathways, the amount of positive reinforcement that came back that said, yes, that makes perfect sense. Because what we were trying to champion was this concept of a just transition. And what a just transition means is we've got to help our economies decarbonize, but at the same time, we've got to balance that with social economic outcomes. Because if you destroy the economy of a country in an all-out effort to decarbonize, at the end of the day, who are we really serving? Who are we really creating value for? Now, I want to be clear that some of you will hear that as low ambition, right? I am here to tell you that is not what we're saying. We're not saying low ambition. What we're saying is we're multi-ambition. We need to push decarbonization, but instead of having one ambition, we need multiple ambitions of still supporting economic growth, supporting employment, energy access, affordability, etc., etc., etc. And that is infinitely more complex than a single decarbonize at all costs kind of approach, right? So that was kind of how we went about it. So a year in the journey, how have we done? versus the pathways that we've set up, we are tracking well, right? Now, is that great news? Ish. It's great news for 2023 and 2024. But the question isn't how do we look now? It's a question of trajectory. If you look at these pathways, they drop like a rock, right? The level of decarbonization by 2030 and by 2050 is very, very steep, even for regional pathways. And back to my comments on 2030, am I absolutely confident we're going to get there? I am not, because the level of policy coordination, the level of investments that needs to come in, the level of regulatory intervention into real economy action, there is a lot of work that needs to be done here that isn't progressing at pace, right? So where does that leave us and our net zero commitments? This is one of the things that I'm trying very hard to help the ecosystem understand. Banks can't do it alone. This one is relatively clear, right? We need government, real economy, etc., etc., etc. But banks have a unique role to play. We are the canary in the coal mine. Because we bank the entire economy, we can tell you literally which sectors are progressing well, which sectors are not going to make it, and why. So Prof, thank you so much for reading our net zero report. We actually put a lot of effort into writing that report, because what you see, and please everyone, read my beautiful report, right? What we try to have a conversation in there isn't this, yay UOB, look at how we're doing, pat, pat, pat. What we tried to do was say, here's how we're tracking, here are what we're seeing is working well, here are the challenges that we're worried about. And as a canary in the coal mine, it is our role, beyond just financing stuff, to be able to call out where we need regulatory intervention, where we need stronger real economy ambitions, etc., etc., and then be part of that conversation for pushing for action. That was a long answer to your question, but I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you probably, I had a sort of a sequel question to it, which I don't think I can articulate well, but I'm going to try anyway. And you probably partly answered it. In a sense, the roadmaps, the net zero roadmaps that have been developed is at an aggregate level. I mean, whether it's a global roadmap or a regional transition pathways, and of course you're talking to your clients, but these are ambitions at this moment in time. But to me, the conversation is something similar to measuring scope 3 in manufacturing companies, right? So if you want to really, so forget about 2030, let's talk about 2050. If you really want to get there, you need to actually have those, yes, there are government agencies, the technology has to change, but your main customers that you bank with, you need to have hard conversations with them. And the reason category 15 is there and banks are being pressured by stakeholders is because you can nudge your customers. So at the moment, I'm not sure that's happening. So how do you see the role of a CSO in a bank to evolve in the next 20, 30 years? Because you can't just be banking. You need to sort of help the customers also leverage on the technology, maybe help them with the policy matters. So, I mean, reports are just reports in a sense eventually, right?
Yeah.
So where do you think the action will go for banks in the next 20? Again, the other challenge, of course, is typically lending is done as a portfolio, right? It's a consortium that does the lending. It's not just UOB alone. It's in many of the larger customers, it's a group of banks that is lending together. So it's, you only have a small voice in it, but you still need to exercise that voice to make the change.
Yeah.
So I hope I'm making sense in the question. So
I realize Prof is very sneaky. He snuck 4 questions into one question. I don't know if you guys realize that, right? So if I kind of bullet point a couple of the key topics that Prof has brought up, which I think are very important, is this concept of transition planning at a real economy client level, is the concept of what is the evolving role of a bank beyond lending money but pushing for action. There's a sneak in there about the role of a CSO and how it looks like today and how it will evolve tomorrow. Prof, you're working me really hard here.
this was a totally extempore question, by the way. So
maybe let me start with, and Prof is very insightful actually in the question he's asked. Let me start with one of the most critical pieces of action that we need to have in the real economy. And it's this concept of what we call transition planning or transition plans, right? Now, a bank can transition plan or for a financing portfolio till the cows come home. But if our real world economy clients aren't actually transitioning, right? It's a piece of paper that's not gonna go anywhere from a bank's perspective. So one of the critical conversations that's happening between banks and real economy clients right now is, number one, your countries have made net zero commitments. Take Singapore, for example, right? Net zero by 2050, okay? Number two, your financiers have made net zero commitments. So your asset managers who hold your equity, your banks that finance your projects, we've made net zero commitments, and they're serious commitments. Mr. or Miss or Mrs. real economy client, how are you making your transition plans such that we are kind of round-robbying action on every front, right? From a national ambition level to financial services, the money's there, but your business model, your assets, your emissions profile, how are you going about it? Now that is what we call a credible transition plan exercise for real economy clients. Now for very large clients, they have the resources to be able to come up with high quality plans. They have CSO teams, business teams, very technical. They can figure that out. They can hire expensive consultants to help them with the latest cutting edge technologies and stuff like that, right? Now, I'm not saying large companies have it easy. Just because they can pull together a transition plan, the realities of aligned governmental regulations, technologies coming to bear, that's still critical. But then you get a whole part of the value chains, right, that are small, medium enterprises that by themselves don't have massive capacity to do sustainability planning or transition planning. And who they respond to are actually B2B to B. It's the queen bees of these sectoral chains that are saying, in my buying behavior or in my vendor behavior, I need more and more sustainability ambition from my value chain, right? And that's what they're responding to. So one of the critical things we do is we work with the large queen bees to ask them for their transition plans, and it's this engagement process. But we try to work with the queen bees to say your value chains need to come along and let us build ecosystem solutions that help your value chain of SME customers decarbonize and transform their business models as much as possible. So that's one whole big piece of the conversation that you asked very simply, but it's actually a massively complex piece of work. And my bankers constantly are out there trying to work with clients, and you get a whole bunch of different range of responses, right? Clients who are sophisticated and their business models have technologies that are commercially viable, it's a very easy conversation. For example, real estate, right? Green real estate is the largest sustainability asset class for any bank out there. It's easy to do because you can green buildings quite easily, right? Then you have hard to abate sectors, and if they're small and you try to have a conversation with them on scope 1, 2, 3, net zero target setting, transition plans, sustainability reporting, ISSB, TNFD, TCFD, and they just go, I have no idea what you're talking about. I just want to be able to sell to my next, a business in the value chain, right? So there, you really have to have a very different kind of conversation. So one of the things we try to do is train our bankers to have different types of conversations depending on sector and size of client, right? So that's that bit. Now, let's talk about what a CSO does. We have a couple of CSOs in the room, right? So a couple of my counterparts here. And I'm going to tell you, I'm pretty sure every single CSO you talk to is going to have a slightly different origin story, job scope, set of headaches, set of opportunities, etc., etc., etc. Because it's so unique to a particular sector, as well as the dynamics within the organization itself. The first thing I will tell you is governance is key. If governance is not right, there is no amount of effort that's going to eventually go the distance. So what do I mean by governance? What I mean by governance is at the board level and at the CEO to senior management level, there must be strong ambition, alignment, and the ability to push for action and hold the organization accountable. That's what I mean by governance, right? And if you don't have that alignment of board, ambition, operational capability at management, etc., 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 what's going to happen is when things get really tough, you're gonna get the squirting off to the sides, you're gonna get the looking away, you're gonna get the wings, you're gonna get the low quality outcomes. But if you have high quality governance set up from day one, you will have the hard conversations on what is the right outcome for country, sector, clients, bank, right? And those are the real conversations that we need to have, right? So for many of us who either work in sustainability or want to work in sustainability, more than almost any other area, I would say investing in the right governance is very, very critical. It protects the organization and the sustainability professionals when the going gets tough, and the going will get tough, right? So that's one piece. A second piece that I think is really important is to understand that sustainability for our organizations is not about the peripheral stuff. So if it's a bit of volunteering, a bit of tree planting, a bit of operational carbon neutrality for a bank, wink wink, right? That stuff is the sideshows, right? In all of our business models, if we're not hitting the core of the business, our revenue generating businesses, assets, business models, clients, etc., it is not a high quality and authentic sustainability strategy. And at some point, even in 2024, you will get, or we will get called out for it. Which is why, again, Prof, when we set our net zero strategies, the operational carbon neutrality, we spend like 15 minutes on that. We spend hours on our financing portfolio and what was the right outcome there. And very gut-wrenching, soul-searching kind of conversations. Regional pathways, what do we commit to, what do we not commit to, what can we stand by, etc., right? And so in UOB, I was given the privilege of drawing our target operating model and the mandate of the CSO office from scratch, right? And the way we drew it was the CSO function and the CSO must report directly into the chief executive. I have a couple of UOB colleagues here, right? And they know that this was one of the key principles we put up. You cannot put sustainability under, in our opinion, and this is not dissing anyone else, you can't put it into another function as a sub-function. If you're gonna be serious about this, it needs to go into the chief executive, right? The second thing we worked on was how do you give the CSO function the mandate beyond becoming the reporter, right? Because you can very quickly see if the CSO does not have the right authority and mandate, all you're going to become is the TCFD, ISSB, TNFD, ESG disclosures guy or gal. And that clearly is not the ambition of a large organization. And one of the important things we actually asked for was the ability to stop a trade, right? Which in a bank, you can imagine, is the beating heart, right, of business. The ability to say on ESG considerations, stop, we're extremely concerned, we're going to bring this all the way up to the highest committee for credit decisioning and do this conversation up, right? That authority, I still remember, again, guys, I'm being quite vulnerable here, when I put it on the white piece of paper and said, I think we're going to ask for this. And I went to CEO, my head of wholesale, and my CRO. And again, I was saying to myself, I've had a good career in UOB. If this doesn't work out well, you know, I'm pretty good with laundry. You know, I could start up a laundromat, right? But they looked at it and they went, yes. Because if you do not have the ability to stop a trade, we at a senior level are actually not going to be able to see the signals of danger and have the ability to debate out transaction by transaction, client by client, sector by sector, what is right or wrong when the going gets tough. So that was the second thing that we did. We work in a hub and spoke manner. So the sustainability office never undertakes anything by itself. We always partner either with the business units, with the corporate functions, or with the countries. And what we did last year was in each of our major subsidiaries, we set up country CSO offices that report directly into the country CEOs in a matrix. And I believe at this point we probably have one of the most established group to country CSO setups in the market. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Eric. Very long answer, very tough question. But as you can see, the role of CSOs are going to become very, very strategic over a period of time. I don't even want to get into discussion about SASP and TCFD and so on. I'm not making light of it. It is very important. In our executive MSc course, we do have a full course on reporting, but the message I hear from him, Eric, is that reporting is important. You need to keep that for the stakeholders, and the reporting standards will constantly change, which means it will be a hard learning curve. But what is more important is to actually execute and make sure that the entire ecosystem actually decarbonizes, which means I'm guessing that there would be, just like there's so much to talk about scope 3 measurement, in the banking sector too, once you've actually talked to the clients and implemented ways to help them reduce it, you will actually need technology to actually update your reports, for example, because it will be not a general net zero report as you publish today. It will be much more specific with actual data from the client. And that could be a opportunity both in terms of combining finance, technology, and reporting together, right? So now we are running out of time very quickly. So I had great ideas to talk about blended financing, carbon credits, and so on, but I'm going to stay away from it. I want to try to probably answer one of a low-hanging question that was asked during the registration. I'm hoping that it's low-hanging, maybe not. Can you share insights on setting a clear pathway to net zero for local industries in Singapore? Because I do believe Singapore's net zero challenges are much not as challenging as, say, Indonesia or other countries. Right?
I'm going to kind of answer that question, but not answer that question. You remember me as a very naughty student. I continue to be a very naughty executive. And the reason I want to answer this question this way is I want to help everyone understand, for Singapore, for example, what the Rosetta Stone, if you want to call it, for decarbonizing the country is. And it is energy, energy, energy. If we can achieve clean energy, every other sector we need to run is peanuts in comparison, right? Okay, maybe sustainable aviation fuel and maritime fuel will be a bit challenging, but pretty much in country, everything else becomes really simple, right? So the issue we have is the modern economy essentially runs on two major things. Well, three, right? It is energy, it is finance, and increasingly it's data, right? And if you can't figure out a way to decarbonize your energy supply, and we can talk a bit about how Singapore is trying to do it, you have no chance in hell. Did I just say that? I'm allowed to say that, right? That you can decarbonize the rest of your ecosystem, right? Because what do your buildings run on? Energy, right? What do your transportation systems run on? Energy. What does all of our banking systems, GovTech, GovSG, it's all energy, right? So the most important thing I think we need to solve at a national level is actually the energy transition. And you can see a lot of, even in the latest budget, where PM was talking about the 5 billion to put in to renewable energy imports, hydrogen, etc., etc., etc. Now, once we figure that out, for industries within Singapore to decarbonize, it's very important we don't think of it as a company by company effort. we need to think of it as sectoral value chains, right? Because if I am a construction subcontractor, how on earth am I going to think about decarbonization and setting a net zero transition strategy by myself? It makes no sense, right? I am part of a construction ecosystem, right? Subcon to main con to property developer, and it's the property developers who have the overarching view on what they eventually need to achieve and the role of each of their value chain in helping them get there. And then companies like the big property companies, working with government regulators, working with financiers, we need to ecosystem out. Therefore, dear little SME subcon, that's what it means for you, right? There is no point in doing transition plans for very small companies. It's literally telling them these are the 3 things you need to figure out. This is how we're gonna get you the support, and this is how you're gonna play your little part in helping this value chain and therefore the country decarbonize. So a lot of how we build our financing solutions, for example, we've got this thing called the U series of solutions. U solar for solar energy, U energy for energy efficiency, U drive for electrification of the transport grid. And we just launched one end of last year called U build, which is decarbonizing the entire built environment. It's meant to curate the ecosystem of partners, make it really simple so that SMEs know what to do, rather than have to run around and figure things out by themselves.
Yeah. So I would interpret that as a relatively lesser challenge globally. I mean, decarbonizing Singapore, because if I were to give you technical numbers, currently it's about, I mean, this is not embedded carbon in imports that we have, just the nationally declared contributions. We are about 54 million tons. We're supposed to peak to about 60 million. And as Eric pointed out, it's mostly energy. And 2 years ago, we were very pessimistic on energy imports, but last year, suddenly in December, in October, when the SEW conference was happening, we have already lined up about 3.2 gigawatts. Is it 3.2 gigawatt? Yeah, of energy imports from neighboring countries, because they are ready to sell to us. So decarbonizing Singapore is less of a challenge compared to the rest of the world in a sense. I know we are very quickly going through the time, so I want to spend some time on sustainability leadership and also share some of Eric's leadership journey itself. But before we get there, maybe I'll allow just one question from the audience. I'm sorry, I wish we could have a lot more questions, but we all have to go home eventually, right? Yeah, maybe. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Thanks, Eric, for coming down and sharing your insights. Actually, I have 2 questions, if you allow me to.
Okay.
The first one is.
What's your name? Sorry.
Sorry, Damien.
Damien.
I'm from VTTI, so I'm in the LNG business.
Yeah.
The first question is, when coming up with your transition plan, did you account for like a downside scenario whereby some customers might shop around for banks? So UOB is obviously at the forefront.
Great question.
Of as you said, as you mentioned, trying to help the clients also decarbonize and so on. But you could have a client where they say, okay, I just go to I'm not meaning to insult, but they go to a Thai bank or Filipino bank, and then maybe even going down the sort of value chain, they might even go to a Chinese bank. So did you account for that? And then the second thing is, I have to commend you for for you taking the risk in forming this CSO office. I think you've done really well. But what was your thoughts when you decided to do it? Because you could have easily continued in a finance function in another bank and then done super well as well. So
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, so thank you for the 2 questions, because the second question nicely segues into the leadership part.
Great. So I'll do the first question first, right? And it's a very important question, and there are 2 perspectives to that, right? The first thing that we realized was the sustainability conversation wasn't only a revenue conversation, and we realized this very early up front, right? The sustainability conversation is a multifaceted stakeholder conversation. And what caught our attention in 2020 was that in the midst of COVID, where everybody was freaked out about not dying and being locked up, European institutional investors were trying to have conversations with us on what are your decarbonization plans, what is your sustainability strategy, etc., etc., etc. So to us, it wasn't only revenue and what clients was going to do. It was our investors saying to us, we need to understand whether you have a game plan surviving COVID, which we all know we will, but in 5 to 10 to 15 years, with this mega trend of sustainability, are you a bank that I'm going to hold in the medium to long term as part of my pension fund or whatever it was, right? And we sat there and went, wow, this is a total shareholder return conversation. And it is not just a, hey, kumbaya, let's save the polar bears and let's plant a couple of trees concept. It absolutely wasn't. The second thing, on the back of 26, it became very clear with all of the countries setting their NDCs that this NDC process was a real process, and that as time went by, yes, it will be a bumpy road, as with everything in life, but it was very likely that the overarching trend was one of increasing ambitions. And then we had to ask ourselves a very simple question. What is the role of UOB, right? Now, many of you very cynical folks will say, every banker just wants to make money and make big bonuses, right? I will tell you, thankfully, at least for UOB, we're very clear on what our purpose is. It is to support the economic development of the economies in which we bank, okay? That is a very simple, clear purpose statement. You ask any one of my key management team, they will tell you that's exactly what we do, right? And so we had to ask ourselves a question, which was, given these mega trends of what investors are asking a bank to do, and where we saw all of the national economies going, if we aren't ready to help our clients decarbonize, in 10 to 15 years' time, our clients will fail. They will get cut off from supply chains, value chains. They won't be fit for purpose for a low carbon world. And if our clients fail, we fail, and we would have failed them. So it was very interesting that when we went through that process in 2020 and 2021, this was a strategic question on how we help our clients get ready. And to your point, there will be clients who are more ready and we help them. There will be clients who are less ready. And it's not like we cut them off, but we cajole them along. We go, hey, you know, this is coming. You become almost that naggy mom, right? And you wait for the ecosystem to resonate and tell them the same thing. And let's be honest, there is no SME in Singapore today that's banked by the big Singaporean ecosystem as well as the global system that will tell you, never heard about sustainability, we're not worried about it, right? It was a conversation we knew would eventually come into the ecosystem. Now, are there clients who are low ambition and will run away and bank with other banks? I think that is not actually a big trend we see. And I'll tell you why. Because once companies in the real economy understand this is real, they want to stay relevant to banks. And the last thing you want to do is, in the past you had access to 5 banks. And then 2 years later, you only have access to 2 banks. And then in 10 years, holy crap. Am I allowed to say that? I just did, right? I only have access to 1 bank that is increasingly coming under pressure. And that bank at some point will have to cut you off. It makes a lot more sense to transform your business model while you have time, work constructively with your ecosystem, with your financiers, to position yourself as a viable, financeable company in the medium and long term. So we haven't seen a lot of that kind of stuff. And to be honest, if they did, in time to come, they're not bankable, and we don't want them as clients. Right?
Beautiful, yeah.
Should I go on to the what made me insane enough to transition? I'm going to tell you.
And maybe to add to that, maybe talk about the challenges at the initial stages.
Sure.
and how you address them successfully. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to tell you guys a funny story about my origin story to CSO. Some of you may have heard it, I apologize, right? I did not put my hand up for this job. So what happened was in 2016, SGX came out with Comply or Explain Sustainability Reporting Requirements. I like to tell the story as I was walking by the CFO's office one day and he grabbed me by the neck and brought me in and goes, hey, you know, there's this sustainability reporting thing. Nobody knows what it's about. Why don't you go figure it out, right? And as part of my extracurricular activities, I took care of sustainability reporting from 2016 onwards, right? And then in 2020, at the end of 2020 or beginning of 2021, CEO had a conversation with me, right? My UOB colleagues have heard me tell this story. And he goes, Eric, sustainability is becoming very important. I went, yes, that's right. I think we need a CSO. I was like, oh, wow, that's really progressive. No worries, boss. Let me go come up with a short list of candidates that I think will be a great CSO for us. And he goes, okay. So I went away. I put together a short list. I put a lot of thought into this. I went back and said, CEO, I've thought very carefully about who can lead us, on this. And I gave him a list of names. He looked at me, again, a bit weird. I went, okay, let me take a look at the list. 2 weeks later, my CFO comes to me and goes, yeah, okay, we decided it's going to be you. Right? To which I went, oh, was that what CEO was trying to tell me 2 weeks ago? He goes, yes, you dumbass. And you went and put together a list of names for him. He was trying to tell you were going to be CSO, right? So in a funny way, I was called to serve, but it was a joyful calling. And the reason I say it was a joyful calling is I find the area of sustainability, I can't even find the words for it. It is very, very tick box on exciting, intellectually challenging, growth-oriented, fascinating, frustrating. You're learning something new all the time. And the amount of different skill sets I've actually had to bring to bear versus the finance portfolio, just new aspects of my executive development, we're out of time.
Okay, please give me your.
Sorry. It's been really, really fascinating, right? And so you give me too much kudos for having been brave. I kind of fell into it, but once given the opportunity, I obviously did the best I could to figure out how to build up a CSO function that would survive not just my few years in it, who knows when CEO will pull me into another portfolio, but to be able to hand on a strong mandate to my successors and be able to serve the bank for the long term.
Thank you. So I think implied somewhere there was that sustainability is a pretty hard field to, in a sense, the learning curve is huge, and you sort of went through the learning curve in a sense. I'll ask you how you actually kept up with all the trends and so on in a moment. Before I do that, I think somewhere in there, in one of the earlier questions, you implied that sustainability, the CSO's position or the sustainability officer's position is very strategic because it's what is going to help the whole organization move in a certain pathway over the next 30 years. Because I also pivoted into sustainability about 12, 15 years ago. Before that, I was operations and supply chain academics. And in operations in the 80s and 90s, I didn't become an academic in 80s. I'm still young at heart. I joined NTU in 92. We used to talk about quality management, and quality management went from quality control, total quality control, and to TQM, and there used to be a chief quality officer. And then the shift changed and said quality is everybody's responsibility. We don't need a central quality office. Do you think that will ever happen to sustainability where maybe not in 2050, by maybe 2080, sustainability becomes everyone's responsibility and you don't need a central sustainability office? Or do you think, a related question is, one of the things that our management department and the strategy folks and the professors do research on is, which has a better pathway to become a CEO? Is it marketing? Is it operations? Is it finance? And it varies from company to company. And I don't know what the latest research is. Do you think that, foresee that maybe in 10, 15 years time, many of the CSOs will eventually become CEOs? So
That's a very loaded question. I will say that I think increasingly, okay, so let's talk about the path to CEO, right? Generally, you find two paths to CEO. Number one, you're a very strong revenue generator, you've run businesses your whole life, and then you become the guy who is best qualified to be CEO, right? That's a very business-oriented kind of CEO. You have a second kind of CEO path where you want a balanced CEO, so you have someone run through the ranks on running business, running country, so you understand geographies, and running a governance function, so that when they get to the CEO route, they're able to see the entire franchise, the value of each part of the franchise, and then be that kind of a CEO. So in the first type of CEO, business is business, right? So I'm going to put that aside. For the second kind of CEO, where you need to have that rounded lens, I think sustainability, whether you do that job for a period of time, or you can demonstrate great agility and understanding of sustainability into strategy, is going to be required. So the example I give is there are two mega trends that I think will sustain us and keep us very busy for quite some time. One is this digitalization, et cetera, right? And the reason you can't find a single word for it is then you have Gen AI coming, you've got general purpose AI that's being worked on. This whole technology piece, it's not going to be done in the next few years. It's going to be a multi-generation, decades, we keep evolving kind of thing. I think sustainability is one of those other things that is going to keep morphing and keep developing. So these two megatrends, I think CEOs need to be able to demonstrate strategic, oh guys, we're out of time again. Oh no, we're back, right? You need to be able to demonstrate familiarity and strategic capability around. Otherwise, can you imagine a CEO in 2035 who can't speak the language of technology? We can't imagine that. I can tell you by 2035, we won't want a CEO who cannot speak the language of sustainability. So that's my view.
Okay. Yeah, the part about CSOs becoming CEOs was an extempore question that I thought of. And I do think more and more CSOs will eventually become CEOs. Simply because they understand the business better. I mean, it's sort of like the CSO's role is more like the role of a CEO at the moment in a sense. So now I'll come to the question that I wanted to ask you earlier. So clearly there's a huge learning curve involved. You had your MBA from Kellogg's much earlier, and you were tasked with becoming the CSO for the bank. So and things keep changing all the time, and I guess you are responsible for publishing sustainability reports as well, where the regulations keep changing all the time. So how do you keep up with the trends? What is your strategy to continuously learn?
Yeah. So when I took on the role in 2021, I'm going to share with you guys that from the month of April when I took on the job till end of June, I still remember it, right? I couldn't sleep through the night, okay? Every single night I would go to bed tired at 11:30, and then my body will get enough rest, and by 3 o'clock I will be awake. And I would say to Mr. Brain, I call him Mr. Brain, we have conversations, right? And I go like, do you need anything? He goes, no, but could we get to work? I was like, it's 3 a.m, go back to sleep. We can work at 7, right? So there was definitely a huge sense of, am I ready for this role? Am I gonna let the bank down? I need to get back to work, I need to learn, etc., right? It finally kind of calmed down at the end of June, right? Because as I skilled up and we put the strategy together, I started to road test it with the organization. It started to make sense. I was like, okay, I think we're okay here. Now, the learning journey in 2021 was very tough because there were no single point courses that you could participate in to be able to get your foundation set up. So what I realized was I had to go all over the place, right? I was the ultimate desktop researcher for those few months, trying to find white papers, thought leadership papers, speak to anyone I could grab my hands on, right, to go through that learning process. I think in 2024, we're in a much more privileged position. There is a lot of academia, a lot of education, a lot of different types of learning resources that have been put together. For example, you know, this master's, I would have loved to have that in 2021, right? Now today, exactly to your point, Prof, the information keeps changing. So one of the jokes we have in my office, my SUSTI office, is 3 months in sustainability is like 3 years in the rest of the world, right? What you thought you knew 3 months ago, now you're wrong, right? Or you got to update it. So one of the things I do is, obviously I read a lot, right? I depend a lot on my colleagues, because, you know, when you have 30,000 pairs of eyes understanding what's happening out there, you get the benefit of 30,000 pairs of eyes. So I learn a lot from my colleagues, and very importantly, I learn a lot from the industry. So I try as much as possible to interact particularly with component parts of the sustainability industry that I'm not familiar with, because that's where I'm going to sit there and go, huh, really? So for example, last night, I was actually at a industry dinner with the carbon markets folks, right? And I find them fascinating. For those of you who are in carbon markets, fascinating. You're also a bit weird. But anyway, so it is very interesting. So I try as much as possible to expose myself that way and just ask a lot of questions.
Thank you so much. And my sharing is somewhat similar as well. But I've been longer in the journey for the last 12 years. The learning never stops, but I think what at NTU we offer is to be able to make that pivot very quickly and learn a bunch of things very quickly. It doesn't mean that once you have a degree or a certificate, that's going to last you forever. You need to continuously learn again. And I would say even sources like LinkedIn. I open up my LinkedIn first thing in the morning and I learn more from LinkedIn than probably the local newspaper. In fact, the local newspaper articles are cited in LinkedIn in a sense. But this is probably a nice place to, in a sense, Eric indirectly plugged our program. And Eric, of course, is on our advisory board, and all of us here. I also have one of my colleagues in sustainable finance, Prof. Matt Dirth. Paul Lee is our director in the executive program. Xia Lung is hiding somewhere in the back. There's also Luke and Ivan over here. So these are the people you need to talk to find out more information. And of course, Nigel introduces. I'll pass it back to him in a moment as we end the conversation. But I probably want to give you some information about this program. I'm not going to play the video. There's a 2-minute video as well that you can sort of play once you go to our website. But we are extremely excited about it because even though there are lots of other programs out there, we feel that we sort of provide, because as conversation just took place, we know that it's not just, I mean, reporting is, to me, you need to understand reporting, but reporting is not the be all and end all. Financing is one part of the piece of the puzzle, but you need to understand technologies outside your discipline. You need to sort of become a multidisciplinary person to be able to have a career in sustainability over the long run, right? So I think that's what NTU as a technological university provides. We provide the business elements of the program, the business models, the strategies, the accounting part, the finance part, but we also provide the technology elements, the science elements, the climate change elements. So it's actually taught by a group of interdisciplinary faculty from across different colleges in the school, in the university, as well as some industry speakers as well. And we also hope to have lots of these kind of sessions also in the program, because you need to be sort of be very in-depth, yet at the same time have the big picture in mind. That's what will make you a very successful sustainability professional. And I believe we have a very compelling value proposition here, because it's offered as an executive MSc, so we expect you to have at least 10 years of work experience, not necessarily in sustainability, but overall 10 years in middle to senior management positions. And what we mean by a modular structure is that when you come to us, you come 6 times across the 1 year or 14 months. And at a time, you're away from work, meaning that you actually have physical classes for 8 days at a time. So we start on a Tuesday and end on a Monday the next week, right? So you have to be away from work for 5 days and do the emails and so on in the evening, and you do that 6 times, you get the executive masters. We first enroll you into a flexi masters program, and if you're Singaporean, effectively the tuition is around 35K, right? So because of the skill future funding, we have linked it to the SSG funding asset. So it's a really a value proposition. If you ask me, should you pursue an EMBA or an EMSC, we do have both the programs, but if you're looking at a career in sustainability, this is really a great program to look at. And as I said, we have others who you can find out more information from. I want to ask Eric the last question, maybe just some comment on our own program and how you think this program can help. I don't want to put you on a spot, but
no, I'll share my honest opinion. I kind of said it just now, right? Is if I had access to something like this in 2021, maybe my sleepless nights wouldn't have lasted for, all the 3 months. So I think it is, Prof, to your point, that conversation of how do you bring a lot of disparate information and be able to absorb that in a single location, and that's the value of it, rather than trying to hunt and curate like I had to in 2021, multiple sources, and you don't know whether you're kind of getting it right or getting it wrong or triple checking it, just to make sure you weren't getting the wrong views on sustainability. So.